And then as I got older, high school, college, I started to think about it, but really as a sort of a peripheral thought, because I had such a high admiration for it that I didn't think I could do it. I figured this is such a great life, such an enormous calling, that it can't be for me.
Wow. Yeah. Like, am I good enough? Like, can I be worthy to do this?
Exactly. And my assessment was, no, you can't do this. This is for someone else. This is not for you. And of course, none of my friends were thinking about it. And so I just said, gee, it would be nice if I could do something like that, but of course I can't, so I'm just going to put it out of my head. But then when I was in college, and I started to do well in college, and I started to realize there are options for me other than what you would think. This whole new world was opening up. And then I started to think, you know what? Let's be real here. I could be a priest if I want to. And when that sunk in, then I started to pray, Lord, what do you want me to do? I was thinking actually of working at the United Nations. I was thinking of getting a degree in international relations and working at the UN. I was very impressed with the various leaders at the UN, how they nurtured peace in the world and such. I was thinking of something maybe like that. And then I said, well, wait a minute now, Lord, what do you want me to do? And then little by little, he just said, I want you to be a priest. Do you want to do that? Would you be willing to do that? And I said, yes, I'd be happy to do that. And that's when I started to move towards the priesthood.
That's beautiful. You said yes, and I love how God asked you the question, but he didn't force you. It was still your choice, like in the end, and that's beautiful. And then I guess you went to the seminary and then continued your studies.
Yes, I went to the seminary, and at the seminary, Holy Apostles Seminary in Cromwell, Connecticut, I met a lot of men who were in the community that I joined, but I didn't join the community yet. So after a while, after a few years in the seminary, you have to choose, what are you going to be, a diocesan priest, a monk, a missionary, a religious, whatever. And I said, Lord, I'm not really sure. What should I do? And I felt the Lord was saying, look at your friends. Who are your friends? Who are the people you chose to be really friendly with? That'll tell you something. So I looked at my friends. Every single one of them was in the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And we were talking like 18 different people who were there on campus who were in the society. They were all my best friends. I said, oh my gosh, Lord, I guess you want me to join the Society of Our Lady. He's like, yeah, bingo, that's it, So I joined SALT and been happy ever since in that community.
Great. I like that God is just very real with us.
Exactly.
He just put it like so simply and just, okay,
Yeah, it works through your friends. He works through relationships.
And tell us a little bit about that society and how that order and the mission and just a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, Katerina, it's really a very beautiful story, the story of what we call Our Lady Society, because it was founded in 1958, just before Vatican II, and our founder had a beautiful inspiration. He believes it was Our Lady inspiring him to found a community where all three vocations of the church, the lay people, that's one vocation. You could have single lay people, married lay people, the religious, brothers and sisters, and the clergy, deacons and priests, where all three vocations, because there really are only three vocations in the church. You're either a lay member, a religious, or cleric. So the founder's vision was that all of these three vocations would work together as the Holy Trinity works together. So you'd have this beautiful familial team spirit. Just as there is that in the Trinity, you would have that in mission, in one community, everyone having the same spirituality, everyone relating in Trinitarian relationships of family and team. So this was really avant-garde for its time. And that was why the Bishop of Boston, our founder, was a diocesan priest in Boston. He told Father Flanagan, he said, Father Flanagan, this is a very beautiful, very precious charism, and it's going to be very needed in the future of the church. But you would have a hard time starting it here in Boston. Boston is very traditional. So at that time, 1958. You need to go to the Southwest, where the Latinos are, because they really, really are excited about family. They're so into family. They'll understand your charism and embrace it right away. So they'll get off the ground running down there. So he went to the Diocese of Santa Fe, or the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, and started the community there in the Mora Valley, a little remote. It was like the dark side of the moon or something. A little remote place in the middle of nowhere. Really, just out in the middle of nowhere.
It's like in the movies when you see, the stars and the.
Oh, exactly. It's we call it Our Lady's Valley. It's a little valley, the Mora Valley, surrounded by high mountain peaks, not too far from Taos. It was very poor, very rural, and that's where he started Our Lady Society. In fact, that's where he's buried. He died last year. The founder, he's buried there, and our co-founder, Father John McHugh, just died 2 days ago, and he's going to be buried there in 2 days.
Oh wow! So we pray for their souls, and that's amazing that they're going to be buried there. And,
yes.
And I know, of course, Our Lady fits in so beautifully, and for this charism, she helps us grow closer to her Son, right, and to the Blessed Trinity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, Katerina, absolutely. She's really the key. It's what we call it, her society. Our Lady was mother of the Son, daughter of the Father, spouse of the Spirit. And she pulls together the three vocations and makes them into a family. It's really quite something when you're in what we call an ecclesial team. Like we have a very strong, long-standing ecclesial team in Belize, in Benque Viejo. And when you're in that team, everyone who visits that team is just really astounded at how beautiful the charism works when it's really in place and when it's really being lived. When you see all these vocations, the three vocations working together in a Trinitarian way, it's just beyond words how beautiful it is.
Yeah, and I was just thinking we could model that in our family life and in the church life as well, thinking about working together in a team in harmony and peace.
Exactly, yes. Very, very much so, yes.
Oh, thank you. So today I know that you wrote 2 books, and one is called Adventures in the Father's Joy, Missionary Stories for the New Evangelization, and the other one is The Prayer of Jesus Crucified, A Simple Way to Go Further in Prayer. And so just tell us a little bit about your inspiration for these books and how they help the mission, and all the proceeds go to the mission, and what the mission does with these funds and just in general. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Katerina. Well, the first one I'll deal with is the Prayer of Jesus Crucified, because everything really begins with prayer. And the purpose behind that book, the motivation really to write that book, was that when I was in the seminary, I was, of course, in the seminary you study spirituality, you study theology, church history, and so many different things, Christology. And I was noticing that as I wanted to develop my prayer life and to become, as involved with God as I possibly could be, I noticed that the various books that were available that dealt with contemplative prayer, which is considered to be, sometimes it's referred to as advanced prayer, which can be a little bit confusing because it can turn people off, because a lot of people can say, well, I don't think I'm suited to advanced prayer. I'll stay with the simple stuff. When actually contemplative prayer is the simple stuff. The difficulty with contemplative prayer, you could say, is that it is so simple. See, it's so simple that it challenges our pride, because as human beings, we tend to think of ourselves as being so important that we have to have complex things. We can't take some sort of a simple route to God. We have to go along a very difficult, complex way, because it kind of feeds our pride. And so that's really the barrier to the simplest way of prayer, which is traditionally contemplative prayer. So in any case, I had been noticing that the books like John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, The Way of Perfection, Teresa of Avila, The Interior Council, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, The Flame of Living Love, The Ascent of Mount Carmel, The Dark Night of the Soul. They're very challenging, really difficult books to go through, to read them. And even as you're reading them, they're very beautiful and poetic. But they don't always get you to where you want to go, in the sense of, okay, so what do I do?
Yeah.
And sometimes they can put a person off because they have certain words, certain language, theological, spiritual language, that many people say, I really don't know what this author is speaking about. So I felt there was a need in the church for a very simple book that anyone could read. They wouldn't be intimidated by it, and yet they could understand it, and they could see how beautiful and how simple it is to enter into the depths of quiet, wordless, contemplative prayer. And that's really the motivation behind the prayer of Jesus Crucified, was I felt like there was this great need, because I sensed that need in myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, because I sensed that need, I really wrote the book.
Great. And just mention a little bit how the book is structured, and what the goal and the focus is. I know you mentioned to get closer to the Lord in very simple prayer. How is the book written and structured?
Yes, Katerina, very good. The idea is that everyone, for the most part, every baptized person who prays, hopefully everybody prays.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the first stage in prayer is called oral prayer or verbal prayer. That's the prayer that children learn from their mom, from their dad. They learn how to pray various prayers. And then as they mature, maybe in high school, they start to do meditative prayer, where they'll work with certain images, maybe an image of Jesus walking on the water, Jesus rising, in the tomb and coming out, and they'll meditate on things like that. And those images feed their soul with spiritual thoughts, with spiritual life. But then there's another way that is beyond words and beyond images. That's when you pray with your heart. So you're not praying really with your mind in contemplative prayer. You're praying with your heart. A lot of people don't understand what that is. Now, someone will say, well, aren't you praying with your heart when you do oral prayer, when you do meditative prayer? Well, yes, you are. But you're not praying just with your heart. When you do contemplative prayer, you're praying just with your heart. And so there's a depth to that, and a simplicity and an immediacy to that that is really just so beautiful and so fruitful and really astounding. But many people don't arrive at that level. One of the reasons, I think personally, is that the materials that have been available over time have been kind of confusing and very challenging and kind of putting people off. And so that's where I sense this need for a very simple way of entering into contemplative prayer. That's why I call the book The Prayer of Jesus Crucified, a simple way to go further in prayer. Because it is a simple way. And it's a very comfortable, secure way. For example, you take the crucifix, the way that you do this prayer, it has a kind of a physical component, which is very Catholic when you think about it. Look at all the sacraments. Right in the Mass
the
we have
Eucharist.
Exactly.
The priest is holding the host, and we receive it. It's very physical. It's entering our body. Yeah.
Yeah, you have the host, you have the wine, you have the bells, you have the incense, you have the beautiful art, you have the altar, you have the vestments. I mean,
Everything.
The choir. It's on it. It's really like a sense of fiesta.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, contemplative prayer, considering the fact that there's no words and there's really nothing there, is very mysterious, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but they're human beings that are doing this contemplative prayer. So I was led by the Spirit to introduce into the prayer the crucifix, Jesus crucified. And so the way you start this prayer is you pick up the crucifix, you kiss it, and you place it on your heart, so that the heart of Jesus, not the back of the crucifix, not the wood, the corpus, the body, so that the heart of Jesus is on your heart. That's pretty physical. That's almost sacramental. Well, a crucifix is a sacramental, but I'm just saying it's not a sacrament. But
Mm-hmm. Right.
when you place that crucifix, which is so iconic for Christianity, is there anything more symbolic of Christianity than a crucifix. When you place that crucifix on your heart so that Jesus' heart is touching your heart, now that in itself is a very unique thing. The listeners would relate to this. How many have done that? Many people have picked up a crucifix, admired it, looked at it, maybe even kissed it. You know, but how many people have placed it heart to heart? Okay, so that in itself is powerful. But it's also addressing the human need for something tangible to keep you a little bit more focused when you're entering into the mystery of quiet, contemplative, wordless prayer. So the Spirit led me to start the prayer, to do the prayer in that way. So you hold the crucifix on your heart, and then you just listen to God who lives within. See, now that in itself is, for many people, is really a breakthrough. Because many people relate to God, but they don't really have that sense that he dwells within us. He's not just passing by, like sometimes he's there. You know, like doing the rosary and I sense something. Oh, I think he's there, you know, right? Or you're at Mass and you're like, oh, I feel kind of elevated. He's here. I think he's here. You know, well, he actually is there 24/7. You know, you wouldn't even be able to exist if he wasn't there. He literally lives and dwells within us constantly. And so what contemplative prayer does is it brings you to his presence within. You meet him there, you encounter him there, and you rest in him there. And when you start to recognize that this is really simple, this is really not hard, this can be done by anybody. And it's so beautiful when you start to realize that, my gosh, this is really the depths of prayer. This is where Jesus is calling me to. This is where he lives. He lives within me. When you start to realize that, it opens up a whole new spiritual way of being for the person. That's the prayer of Jesus crucified.
That's incredible. I was just thinking about this scripture, and I believe it's Matthew, where your treasure is, there also will your heart be.
Exactly.
So, you know, heart to heart,
Yes.
in communion with God, going further in prayer. Everything in this world will fade, but, you know, journeying towards Christ and having that relationship and experiencing his love, that is what I think this book will really inspire and help us to get to that, to listen to God.
You know, you really hit a nerve there, Katarina. Let me just go to the introduction real quick. It says right in the introduction that you said, you know, to rest in his love, to go to his love. In the Catechism, many of our listeners will be familiar with the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the official catechism that was issued by John Paul II. It says, this form of prayerful reflection, it's referring to meditation. It says, this form of prayerful reflection is of great value, but Christian prayer should go further. Okay, in other words, further than meditation, to the knowledge of the love of the Lord Jesus, to union with him. Those words in that catechism are a historic breakthrough for contemplative prayer. Because what they're really saying is that contemplative prayer, the depths of prayer, advanced prayer, whatever you want to call it, is for everyone. And the church is actually calling us to go. They're not really saying this is an option. They're saying, here, I'll repeat it, but Christian prayer should go further to the knowledge of the love of the Lord Jesus, to union. Union is a buzzword for contemplative prayer, to union with him. And then right after that sentence starts the section on contemplative prayer. So the church is just really making it as clear as possible that everyone is called to perfection in the sense of entering into the deepest loving relationship with the God that is possible.
Right, amen. It's not just for those who are learned, but for everybody.
Right, it's not just for the monk in the monastery, the priest in his rectory, the sister in her convent.
It's for all of us.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So we're going to take a little break now and play a song for the Holy Spirit, and you know, God who dwells in us may send his Holy Spirit upon us. And we'll talk more about Adventures in the Father's Joy when we come back. Thank you.
I don't know how to explain his gifts. Are just so phenomenal. When you see the cover of the Prayer of Jesus Crucified, you're going to see a person walking down a dirt path, and on the side is just some grass, some wild grass, and then in the horizon, coming up out of the horizon, out of the clouds, is this glowing cross. Now, how you get a cross to glow on a cover, I don't know, but it actually looks like it's illuminated by an electrical light or something. And then the words, the Prayer of Jesus Crucified, a simple way to go further in prayer, they almost seem like they were constructed by God out of the clouds. It's almost like God took some of the smaller clouds and made the words out of it. And so the cover illustrates the simple way. You have someone walking down this simple way and coming to Jesus crucified, coming to his cross, coming into a deeper communion with him. Our founder, Father Flanagan, always used to say that Jesus crucified is an instrument of communion. He brings us into himself through his crucifixion. And so, you know, the publisher's artist, T.J. Burdick, is just an incredible, gifted artist. He's also a speaker, by the way. He does speaking engagements around the country with youth.
Is he a Christian speaker?
Oh, he's a Catholic.
Oh,
he's a
Catholic.
Third Order Dominican.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Yeah. And then he also, I remember, first I published the Prayer of Jesus Crucified, and then right after it, I mean, a month or so after it, we were going to publish Adventures in the Father's Joy. And I remember saying to the publisher, do you think that TJ could come up with another great cover for Adventures? I mean, is that even possible to come up with something equally as good? He goes, he'll do it. And he did.
Yeah.
I really didn't think he was going to be able to come up with two completely phenomenal covers, but he did. And so the Adventures cover is just unspeakably beautiful. It's so mysterious, so beautiful, so compelling, and so much on target, communicating the whole beauty and mystery and wonder of missionary outreach, of evangelization. And so Adventures was, you could say Adventures was a kind of a follow-up from the prayer of Jesus Crucified, because when you enter into Jesus, into the depths of quiet prayer, of oneness with Jesus, that oneness takes on a life of its own. Now you've got Jesus involved. It's almost like a marriage. You know, whoever you are, once you get married, of course Joe knows something about this, but once you get married, you're on another path, because there's another spirit there, another soul, and Jesus is in there. And so this whole thing takes on a life of its own. Well, that's how it is with contemplative prayer. You get into such a communion with Jesus that now you're on another track, because Jesus is taking the lead.
Mm-hmm.
You gave it to him.
Yeah.
You become one with Jesus. You're saying, Lord, here's my heart. Do with it whatever you want. Well, what he does with you is when you meet him in the depths, you meet him as the poor Jesus. You see him as he is. He's impoverished. He has nothing other than love. So you meet Jesus as this poor, impoverished Jesus. Because in contemplative prayer, you let everything go. You yourself become poor. And you meet Jesus, who's poor. And so when you meet the poor Jesus, he takes you to the poor. See, so you enter into the mission of bringing the good news of Jesus to the poor, which is the gospel.
Right.
And so there's where Adventures in the Father's Joy comes from. You meet Jesus in the depths, he takes you to the poor, and then you're into Adventures in the Father's Joy. And so the book Adventures in the Father's Joy was written because I had read Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis's book on his apostolic exhortation on the new evangelization. And I read that and I was so utterly impressed with it. I, as a missionary, being a missionary for 25 years, having worked in Belize, Mexico, Guatemala, South Texas, having seen what missionary life is like and what the experience is like, and then reading Evangelii Gaudium, I was so completely impressed because I could relate to everything. Everything Pope Francis was teaching, I was like, I know that, I've experienced that, I've done that. This is true, this is exactly what it's like. And I said, you know what? Someone needs to write something more that will manifest incarnate, as it were, these beautiful evangelical and missionary principles that are expressed in Evangelii Gaudium. I said, you know what? I think I could do that. I think I could write about my own missionary experiences and show how they manifest and incarnate principles that are more or less theoretical, but I could put flesh on those principles so that Evangelii Gaudium could come to life, so that these timeless, beautiful principles of mission and evangelization could be brought to life through my own personal mission experiences.
It's like what you were mentioning before about how we want to do good, but how. It's kind of like a manual, and we see like your examples, and if you know, a listener or anybody reads your book, we could read it and try to imitate it in our whatever small way we can.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is, Catherine. I saw it as kind of, as I was writing it, and then of course when I finished it, I was picturing people who are going out to do evangelization. Say, for example, when you were in the St. Catherine's youth group, and Father Johnny or whoever would lead you on some sort of evangelical mission somewhere. I was picturing, or like say going to World Youth Day,
Right.
I was picturing people taking adventures with them, taking the book with them, and in the evening reading a little bit from each of the chapters to be inspired and to know that you never go by yourself. You're always going to have Jesus with you. You're always going to have angels with you. It's always going to be a beautiful, wonderful adventure. So I saw it as something that people would actually take with them when they go on mission or when they go out to evangelize. Or if they don't take it with them, that they would just read it beforehand and be sort of inspired to push on, you know, move ahead, because very often it's kind of difficult to get started, to move in mission, to move out, to reach out of ourselves to others with the gospel. Sometimes there's a kind of an inertia, and so I figured that adventures would help people to move beyond that inertia.
Thank you, Father. Actually, I could relate right now. A little story. You know, the radio show. This radio show, I think it's like a mission, and it's just such a beautiful. I'm just so happy and blessed every time to share and to come with the listeners and our guests and everything. Sometimes, I guess, last month or some days you just kind of feel that inertia, or you know it's good and you want to keep doing it, but you don't have, I guess, that excitement or drive momentarily, and that's when the Lord comes in and gives you grace. Or sometimes he puts books like this and people like yourself in our path. Or even I went to an event last week at the coffee house. There's a young adult coffee house that opened up actually in the basement of the rectory of St. Francis of Assisi Church in Green Lawn, New York. It's in the Huntington area.
Nice.
So the basement was refurbished and became a beautiful little, there's like some tables and very relaxing atmosphere to just chat and hang out with like-minded young adults, you know, the Christian Catholic faith. And I went the other night and was just chatting, and I really felt uplifted in my spirit. I really felt inspired and really felt, okay, you know, this is a nice thing. I felt empowered to continue this mission.
Yes.
So
yeah.
that was an example.
I'm so happy that you went. You know, even that is a reaching out. Christian fellowship is so vital to the evangelization, to the new evangelization. You know, in Evangelii Gaudium, Caterina, the Pope, you know, Pope Francis, who is a missionary, he's a formed, trained, experienced Jesuit missionary.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Cool.
Oh my gosh, the Jesuits, what marvelous missionaries they are. I mean, the missions that they established in the world are just
In South
so,
America.
yes,
right?
exactly. So
Mhm.
beautiful and so well done. But in any case, in Evangelii Gaudium, he makes this point which many people really, for the first time probably they're encountering this particular point. He said, if you want to advance in I think it's right here in the back. Let me see if I can get this quote
Sure.
correct. He says, if we want to advance in the spiritual life, then we must constantly be missionaries. Now, a lot of people would never see it that way. They would think, well, gee, if you want to advance in the spiritual life, you have to boost up your prayer program, get moving, take it up a notch. That's how you advance in spiritual life. And the Pope says, well, that could certainly be part of it, but that's not the whole picture. Because where does your spiritual life take you? If it doesn't take you beyond yourself, if it doesn't take you to others in some shape or form, then it's really not an authentic, prayerful life or spiritual life. And so the spiritual life should be moving you to mission and to evangelize. That's why I say it was so beautiful that you reached out to the coffee group and shared your life with others. And because that's what we need one another. So there you have like two sides of the coin. The prayer of Jesus crucified is that deep prayer life that, let's call it like the underpinnings of the new evangelization. And then Adventures in the Father's Joy is a kind of a guide and an inspiration. Where does this interior life go? How do you express it? How do you manifest what's within? Well, Adventure says, this is how you do it.
Oh, beautiful. Do you want to mention a story in Adventures in the Father's Joy that really highlights or comes to mind for you? Very inspiring story.
Yes, I think I would. Thank you, Katerina. That's a great opportunity. I think I would like to emphasize maybe this one story in the context of what we're speaking about right now. Reaching out and getting beyond the inertia. There's this one story in the book where our founder, it was around Christmas time, and our founder had challenged us seminarians. There's about 3 of us in the mother house. Why don't you go down to the orphanage? Our community has an orphanage in central Mexico with about, believe it or not, about 250 children.
Oh, wow.
Most orphanages have 20, 30, maybe if an orphanage has 50 children, it's like, wow, that's a big orphanage. But this orphanage is like a mega orphanage. It has 250 children, ranging from age 3 to 18. After high school, they go out on their own. In any case, he challenged us to go to this orphanage. Well, the other seminarians didn't want to go, so it was left to myself to go. And I got to Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. I was in South Texas, where our headquarters is. Crossed the border into Mexico, went to the bus station. I had a few dollars to take a bus. All the buses were filled because in Mexico, people take buses. We take planes. In Mexico, the economy is different. People take buses. And so at Christmas time, everyone's going somewhere in Mexico on a bus. And so the bus I needed to take was filled, and there wasn't going to be one to the next day. Okay, so here you come with the inertia. I already was by myself, which was disappointing. And I was very tempted at that point to say, okay, forget it. I have nowhere to spend the night. I'm going back to Robstown, and that's the end of this. It was crazy of me to do this in the first place. But I turned to the Spirit, and I felt the Spirit was saying, go to the orphanage. So I was like, yeah, that was my intention.
Very
but
direct.
How? How do I do this? There's no buses, and I have nowhere to stay for tonight. And I got this inspiration, take a plane. I was like, take a plane? I had like $50 US. The plane, how could I possibly pay the airfare? It would definitely be more than I have. And I just kept feeling this sense of, just go to the airport and take a plane. So with this kind of amazing sense that I was being directed, I got past the inertia, and so I went to the airport. I got into a cab, El aeropuerto, por favor. I went to the airport, and I'm looking at the prices of the planes, and I said, oh my gosh, there's no way I can get down to Querétaro, where I'm going. The only plane I could afford is this plane that's going to Monterrey, which was very far from Querétaro, but a little bit closer. And so I said, well, I'm going to take this plane, even though when I get to Monterrey, I'm not going to have a penny in my pocket. And I'm going to be 4 hours into Mexico, into the interior Mexico. At that time, I really didn't know Spanish. I had maybe kindergarten Spanish. I'm going to be in Monterrey, Mexico, without a penny in my pocket, stranded, vulnerable. What am I doing this for? And I just kept sensing, just do it.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I did it.
Okay.
And I got to Monterey, and when I was on the plane, I was really laughing to myself. I said, I really need to have a checkup or something. There's something wrong with me. This is literally crazy. What am I doing? My superiors will probably say, you're a crazy person. What are you doing this, you know? So I got to Monterey, got off the plane. I'm walking around, and I see two people speaking English. I went over, I explained my situation. They paid for the next ticket to the next place, which was not yet where I needed to go, but it was much, much closer. So a long story short, Katerina, I got there. How I got there, I really don't know. But I did get there. And I got there really, I don't want to go into the whole story because I don't want to do a spoiler kind of a thing for the book, but I did get there, and I got there in the most first-class way you could ever imagine. When I gave myself over to the Lord, made myself vulnerable for the mission, for the gospel, you know, like Jesus said, he who lays down his life for me and for the gospel, he will find it. Well, I really did lay down my life in that incident. And I got there with in such a beautiful way, such a sort of a wonderful way that, read the book, folks. You're going to love it.
Yes. It's kind of like a cliffhanger, right?
Yes,
I want to
yes.
know what happens. That's amazing. That's so fun. And as you were speaking, I was mentioning that the Lord on the cross, he just emptied himself and gave his life. And I think it's a perfect example that, like you were mentioning, ties into this book, and how we have to, in our heart, have the Lord crucified in us in order to be able to go on these missions.
Exactly.
And do these things.
Mm-hmm.
So amazing.
Yeah.
So, okay, we have a couple minutes, and this is a perfect timing actually, because we're going to go into the saint of the day. And sometimes our Dr. Truffaut and Dr. Palmer would have a saint of the day, and I've been trying to